Welcome, everybody. I am DonMarshall72, colloquially known as the obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy on TikTok, and I am happy to say that I am joined by the one and only Corey Olson, colloquially known as the Tolkien Professor. Professor, thanks so much for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And you know what? I just realized that I need to turn the music down because we need to be able to hear you. So can I just get a mic check real quick?
Sure. Yes. Checking here.
Perfect. This
How
is
does
what
that
my
look?
viewers
Okay.
this is what my viewers are subscribed for. Technical glitches
There we
and
go.
a lot
Hey,
of
sometimes it's fun to be part of the moment.
It
You know,
is.
that's
It is. And I feel like especially with coronavirus, we've all gotten used to that, you're on mute, turn your video on.
right. Exactly.
It's all just been
Exactly.
ridiculous. So for those that may not know who you are, I can't think of a better way to introduce you than this is the guy that knows everything about Tolkien except for maybe his family. But please tell the people who you are.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Corey Olson. I started a podcast about, 11 or 12 years ago now, called The Tolkien Professor. And basically the idea was, I was a professor. I was teaching Tolkien and medieval literature. And I was looking initially for a sort of an external, another alternative scholarly publication mode. Basically, I got frustrated with scholarly publishing, how scholarly publishing means that you spend all of your life doing work that only like 50 people will ever read. And it just, and it's it's fine, like, and often that's really, really important. But I just felt, especially since I was doing work on Tolkien, I'm like, this is absurd. Like, I know that there are thousands of people out there who would be interested to talk about this. And my own inclination has always been to, teaching is always what I loved. And I'm like, why should we not be, I'm not publishing this stuff, I'm hiding it, in these scholarly publications. So that's why I started the podcast originally. And it was back, closer to the beginning of podcasting. And so it's been a really fun adventure that has led me on to now I'm the president of a new online university that kind of grew out of it. So, it's very much a one strange thing grows out of another strange thing kind of situation.
As these things often do, right?
Exactly.
I do have to say, speaking of education, I was doing a little bit of background research on you, and I have this gnawing question. I have so many questions for you, but most of them are about Tolkien. This one specifically is a choice that you made. Correct me if I'm wrong, you double majored at Williams College, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
It said there that your double majors were English and astrophysics.
That's
and
right. Yes.
I gotta ask, why? Can you explain that just in any way?
Well, sort of. Okay, so the honest truth is that my astrophysics major, that was an easy out, actually. Okay, so here's how it happened.
Mhm.
Basically, I've always been, throughout high school, I was, I did very well in both in English and in math and science. In fact, my better grades by far were generally in math and science. I've argued with my English teachers too much. But anyway, so I did both. My heart was like given to English and the humanities from the beginning. I mean, when I went to college, I was like, okay, I'm going to be an English major. This is going to be great. And my parents were like, you would be ashamed to throw away all of that ability in math and science. Maybe you should just keep doing it, and I'm like, well, physics was kind of fun. And then my freshman year, I'm like, well, and astrophysics, that sounds twice as cool as physics, right? We didn't do that in high school. So I'll do that. And I kept doing math, for about another year. So I started as a physics major, physics, English double major. And I proceeded along that route till about sophomore year. So in sophomore year, I was on track to be a physics major. I was on track to be an English major, but I was definitely feeling the pressure to kind of choose where I was going to focus my attention, and it was becoming increasingly clear. But I mean, honestly, it wasn't like totally a choice. Like, I knew I wanted to focus on English. And at that point I had totally fallen in love with medieval literature, and I was feeling fairly confident spring of my sophomore year that grad school in English is what I wanted to do. But but here I was, I'd now invested like 8 semesters of work into physics and math. But I also knew, I'm like, man, if I try to finish the physics major, like there were several like upper level courses that were looming, including like the, senior seminars and things. I'm like, I know people who have done these classes, and that's like an incredible, intense amount of time. I can't do it.
It's
Like,
a
I know
bit
I'm
too
not going to be
much,
able to do
yeah.
it. Right. But at the same time, it's like, it would be a shame to like not have any representation, on my transcript of this. And that's when the idea occurred to me. I was like 2 classes shy of completing the astrophysics major. And I'm like, well, okay. All right. So, because I had happened to take a couple other astrophysics electives as well, just for fun, you kind of as tangential to the physics major.
So you're like kind of smart.
Yeah, so it was like, okay, we can finish that out, and then I can have that on my transcript, and it was, so in the end it was just kind of it just kind of happened.
I love it. I love it.
But no, it's been nice. I mean, there are a lot of things that my own training in math and science has been enormously helpful to me throughout my life, even in my literary studies. There are so many things that just kind of like the mindset of scientific inquiry and mathematical discipline really kind of helps in the training and
Right.
and in teaching.
Right.
And not to mention the fact that it's also been a big advantage throughout my career to be the member of the English department who wasn't afraid of numbers. So like I found myself even from very early in my career being like the one who was always asked to audit the budgets and,
Fair.
stuff like that. So anyway, it's been good, and of course with Signum University, and as things have moved forward with that, it's been useful at many points along the road.
I can imagine. Now, I've had this question asked a few times in the chat so far, and I myself am curious. How exactly does one go about becoming the Tolkien Professor?
Okay, so that was kind of an accident too. So when I started off my podcast, I was looking for a name, right? I'm like, I've got to have a good name for my podcast, and I decided, I'm like, but I want it to be descriptive. Like, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. Like, I don't want people to be like, well, I was hoping for some fun Tolkien show, and here's this like professor lecturing at me. I'm like, I better warn them right on the label, like what they're gonna get, So I'm like. So what I came up with first was like the URL for the website,
Right.
and I'm like, tolkienprofessor.com. Like, okay, that works.
Simple,
like, that's
straight to the point. Yeah.
Right. It tells you exactly what you're getting. It's Tolkien material and from a professor, and so okay, I like that. And so then I'm like, okay, so the podcast can be the Tolkien Professor. That works well enough. What I didn't anticipate, and I'm not sure why, I just didn't think it through well enough, was that people would actually start calling me that. I didn't intend it as a title. Like, it was just like, I'm a professor who does Tolkien, so that's what I'm going to call myself. And then everybody started calling me the Tolkien Professor with this like heavy emphasis on the definite article.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, that's really. And now I've got colleagues who always give me grief about
I'm
this.
sure.
Like,
I'm sure.
Mike Drought. Do you know Mike Drought?
I'm not familiar.
The Tolkien scholar. He's a wonderful Tolkien scholar, Anglo-Saxonist. Has a number of lecture series that are out. He's lectured at Signum several times. He's an amazing Tolkien scholar, and gives me no end of, every time I see him, like, he teases me about this, like we had him at Mythmoot a couple years ago, and I was on a panel with him, and he's like, can I just say again, he starts off the panel with, can I just say again, how much of an honor it is to be at the table with the Tolkien Professor. Like, I'm like, yeah, well, I couldn't very well say a Tolkien Professor, could I? That's a really bad name. So anyway, so that was a little bit, that part was unintended.
Right.
I wasn't thinking of it as like a name for myself. My branding sense.
It's good branding, though. It's great branding.
It is. It works. It works. But it's like I say, it makes me blush often nowadays.
Well, it is appreciated nonetheless. So I'm curious to see, because I've gotten this question a lot. How did you get started with Tolkien? Because so many times I think people say, oh, well, I watched the movies and then I read the books. But I think for you, it was a little bit different, correct?
Certainly was. So for me, it was, and it was actually interesting, because one of the things that also, like, for the pre-movie generation, the predominant version of this story is being introduced by a parent, right? Or there's like some member of your family who, who kind of brought you into Tolkien or read it with you or something as a child or something like that. That is a very common version of this story. Mine is almost like that, but not quite, because mine actually started with my parents choosing to read The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis to me. And they did that when I was 7. And
A good age.
Yeah, it was a great age, and I loved The Chronicles of Narnia. And that was like over the summer they read them with me, but when it came around towards Christmas time, like word had gotten out into my family, like they'd been telling stories about how much I loved The Chronicles of Narnia and how I'd been reading them and rereading them since then. And so I had a cousin who had read Tolkien. My parents did not know Tolkien at all, so it was not like the next step. Like
okay.
I mean, they probably heard of him, but it was not on their radar screen at all. But I had a cousin who did read Tolkien, and he gave me a copy of The Hobbit for Christmas that year because he was like, "Well, I heard that you like, The Chronicles of Narnia. If you like that, you'll probably like this too." And he was very right about that.
Absolutely. Well, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were great friends.
Yes, they were. And it's interesting, actually, because to some extent, I think that he was right. That is to say, like, consider it as an abstract proposition. I think it's probably true that a 7-year-old who loves The Chronicles of Narnia will probably also love The Hobbit.
Oh, absolutely.
It's probably true. But Tolkien and Lewis are they were very good friends, but they're very, very different.
They are.
And, that's so I mean, like, it's one of the reasons why Tolkien himself disliked the Chronicles of Narnia, because they are so different from the kind of thing that he does.
Yeah, they are both in the fantasy realm, but they're not necessarily parallels or intersecting at all. They go their different ways.
Very much. Lewis just thinks very, very differently from Tolkien.
Yeah. Sometimes Jesus is the lion.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so there's lots of things there. But anyway, so point is, I got my copy of The Hobbit, and I soon thereafter, I don't even remember how, but somehow I lived in rural southern West Virginia at the time, Summers County, West Virginia, for anyone who knows West Virginia. So like very far from a paved road is where I was currently living. And, so I didn't have a library. My parents found me a copy of The Lord of the Rings, and I immediately. People sometimes will ask me if I can remember like my first impressions, and I can't. Usually, really? I can't. Very rarely can I remember my first impressions of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, and that's because like my first reading of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings was followed immediately by my second reading of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and like I began rapidly, like that year when I had just turned 8. I began that year like the habit that I've always had of reading and rereading and rereading, and I still read.
How often do you? After how many years? How many times have you reread the trilogy? Do you think?
I don't know. It's hard to tell because, of course, when you're writing about something, you read it a whole bunch, and so it's kind of hard to quantify. But I have read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Well, it started with The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and it's now expanded to most of his corpus about once a year. Like I'm just kind of in a continual cycle of reading and rereading. I usually do. I've now come to a place where I'm kind of constantly doing it, because I'll read like a few chapters a day, and I almost so there are very few days, and it's why like sometimes I struggle with people will be like, so are you celebrating Tolkien Reading Day this year? And I'm like, Tolkien Reading Day to me, like the phrase Tolkien Reading Day would be like, hey, are you celebrating Oxygen Day today? Like like what are you gonna do for Breathing Day? Like I'm like like seriously, okay. I mean,
I love it. Every day is Tolkien Day when you're the Tolkien Professor.
Tolkien Reading Day. I mean, seriously, it's like there are days in which people don't read Tolkien. Okay.
I do have to say, I have taken recently to just listening to the audiobooks as I fall asleep. Oh, yeah. The Robert Inglis versions are my particular favorite. His voice just calms me down right away, and it's like,
I'm a big fan. There are a lot of people who have over the years complained in various ways about those, but I love them. I love the Rob Inglis reading. And I will admit, like, even I've listened to the I mean, you knew about the recent Andy Serkis reading of The Hobbit,
Yes,
right?
yes.
The new Andy Serkis reading, which is really, really good. But honestly, I will still listen to the Rob Inglis version. It's
Fair.
Andy Serkis is surprise, surprise, a wonderful voice actor.
Yes.
Right? Like, the dialogue and the accents and everything in his version is top notch, but his narration, like actually just reading prose, is not as good as Rob Inglis is.
Does a pretty good Smeagol impression, though.
He did. And actually, you know, it's funny because it might seem weird, but I was like, how well is it gonna work? Like, his
does it translate well?
Does it translate, like, really to doing literally the text, right? Because of course Andy Serkis's Gollum voice, right, grew out of not only the Lord of the Rings, which of course is not, like, Gollum in The Hobbit is not exactly the same as Gollum, Gollum in the Lord of the Rings, but of course, like, the particular stuff with Gollum, right, that Peter Jackson was doing, which was very interesting, but also very different from, you know, what happens with Gollum in the books, right? There's a lot of differences between book Gollum and movie Gollum.
Yes.
And it's fascinating. I mean, it's, you know, of the places where they deviated from the text, their depiction of Gollum is one of my favorites. I think it's very, very interesting. But it's different, and anyway, and that's the environment, like, that's the situation, right, in which Andy Serkis's whole Gollum thing emerged. And so I was like, you know, it'll probably be okay. But
I think
I'm
he
not
did
100% sure. Yeah,
I think he did an all right job. Just all things considered, and I must say, I do have a Gollum emote in all of this, so people in the chat are spamming my Gollum emote. So just as far as, like, okay, there's a question, I'll ask him later. Oh, hey, more Gollum.
More Gollum emotes. Yeah.
It's very nice, precious. Thank you very much. That's my own Gollum impression. I did Lilo and Stitch, and then just kind of turned it into chain smoking Stitch. And
right, there you go.
Yeah, and that's how
actually chain smoking Stitch is a pretty good characterization of that, actually.
So you mentioned the movies and Andy Serkis and sort of that adaptation and how they needed to take it from the books to the movies. I'm curious because you are someone that read the books first and then saw the movies. What did you think of the adaptation coming from someone that had read Tolkien so much? Yeah.
So it was, on the one hand, it was an eerie experience. Like, it was the first time I'd ever been to a movie theater watching a first release movie I'd never seen before, and finding I could quote my way along with it, you know, like you do with The Princess Bride or something, you know. That was weird.
My name is Inigo Montoya.
You're right, exactly. I mean, you know, it's, you know, there's some movies that you know so well, you just, like, you know, can't help but speak along with it, right? And I found myself doing that with this movie I'd never seen before, which was weird, right?
You know,
it's very in different. The moments when but then there were other times which were, like, surreal, like when they would take a section that I got a passage that I knew, right, a bit of text that was really familiar, but they would move it, right, to a different part of the story. And I remember in particular when the famous moment in the film at the end of the Council of Elrond, you know, when Aragorn steps forward and says, if by my life or death I can save you, I will. And Gandalf says, you know, I shall help you bear this burden as long as it is yours to bear. And you know, of course, like, so Gandalf's quote is a quote from chapter 2, you know, and Aragorn's quote is a quote from chapter 10. Both of them moved forward into the Council of Elrond, and it was just like, I'm like, it's like a montage of, like, book one. It was, you know, so there were several moments where like the very familiarity of it made it strange in that way, because I'm like, okay, I didn't hear that quote coming in this context, but okay, I mean, it worked. I mean, you know, again, no complaints, but it was strange. It was a weird experience.
I do remember in the behind the scenes of the first extended edition, it was some sort of allegory of Peter Jackson, Fran Philippa doing the script, just playing surgery, just like cutting and pasting various parts of the movie into where it needed to be. But it does work, and it's been
it does. And so, but I mean, my main the two biggest overall experiences that I recall from watching the films were, first of all, there were several times when with the visuals are so perfect, you know, that I just found
Yeah.
myself actually saying that out loud. I'm like, that's perfect. It's amazing.
What did you
remember,
find
like,
perfect? What specifically?
the scenery, the landscape, more than anything
okay,
else. Their
okay.
choice of landscape. And then there are some exceptions to this, like there are no prairies in New Zealand, right? So like Rohan is not quite right. You don't get the sense of like the open rolling, you know, fields with herds of horses on them and stuff, you know. So Rohan is the only, though like the shot of Edoras and Meduseld is wonderful. I mean, that's yeah, exactly. So even within there, there's places, but yeah, so many of the sets, so much of the landscape. I think that like the, you know, just that was, I think, the element of the film which almost never disappointed. You know, almost never disappointed. We come to a new place, you know, like I remember seeing the films for the first time, you know, like opening in the Shire and then seeing Rivendell and then going to Lothlorien, even things like Holland passing through and Moria as they went
for the brief time that they are in Holland. It is that sort of scenery that you imagine.
That kind of helicopter shot through Holland. I remember saying out loud in the, you know, quietly in the theater, it's perfect. It's perfect. That's exactly it. You know, with the like the ruins, you know, that you see, the ancient ruins of, you know, where the evidence of the old society that's no longer there. And I mean, it's just, so that was just, it almost never disappointed, you know, at no point.
So I'm curious to see, as we kind of transition from the movies, I don't know if you have seen in the last few weeks a certain Soviet Russian version of The Lord of the Rings has come to light. Have you seen it?
I haven't gotten to watch it yet. I've been meaning to, but I've been tied up in a whole bunch of other things, so I haven't gotten around to it yet. But I've heard about it and I've seen some bits, and it looks pretty extraordinary.
It is, and I think this is just sort of a spur of the moment idea that I just had. But Professor, if you would like to in real time watch it with me and chat, you are more than invited and welcome back. We can watch it together, and just, I think seeing your reaction more than anything will be better than the film itself, because
that would be fun.
It's like a Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of, or watching The Room, where it's so bad it's good, but then there are parts that legitimately scared me. So just maybe prepare yourself for that.
Yep.
So on that same sort of topic, we've got the movies and the Russian version. The next sort of entity of the Lord of the Rings is the Amazon TV show that's coming up. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, because in keeping up with sort of all of the news that's been happening with it, I label myself as cautiously optimistic, maybe a little bit worried, but you maybe have a different opinion, or?
I think cautiously optimistic is good. I mean, first of all, I as a general thing, you know, in the absence of data, I'm always going to prefer to choose to be positive about it, right? I mean, it's awesome until it's proved otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, because life is too short. But
I like
to get like all worked up and bent out of shape about something you don't know nothing about, right? You know, so are there reasons, you know, for like people who worry to be worried? Sure, not saying there aren't, you know, not saying that people who are worried are making it all up out of whole cloth, but there's lots to lots of reason to think that it might be good. But yeah, so I've been working pretty much since the Tolkien films came out on sort of a self-improvement project, right?
Is this your Silmarillion film project, or
sort of? Well, that's the kind of the result of this project. The project I mean is like how to not be a purist. That's been my thing, right? Because I used to be a dreadful purist. I mean, I used to get on a soapbox and like when I was in college and stuff like that, and be like, no, and so that was my first impulse when the Peter Jackson films come, you know, to be like, let me tell you how wrong that is in so many ways. Like it's really easy to go there, and I totally get it. Like, and I'm not saying anyone who does this and anyone who feels that way, I'm not trying to say you're wrong, because you're totally not wrong, right? But what I have kind of learned through the years, and really kind of like dealing with and talking about the Jackson films, and then anticipating, discussing, and dealing with the Hobbit films when they came out, and other things. As many people know, I did a whole 3-year series on the Hobbit films, kind of anticipating it and discussing it as it was coming out, thinking through the question of adaptation. And that was really the turning point for me, really the full turning point for me, because once you really kind of immerse yourself into like what needs to happen, right, in adaptation, like what it means to adapt something, to really make a news story, because it's, you can't just take the book and project it on the screen, right? That doesn't work. Like,
as much as we would all like to see a 15-hour version,
and even then, like, if merely the act of changing the medium must change so much. Tolkien talked about this. In on fairy stories, for instance, one of the things Tolkien is talking about, he's talking about stage adaptation specifically. Stage adaptation of fairy tales and things is the specific topic he's discussing. But what he says is completely relevant to all of the Tolkien films and stuff as well. And that is, he says one of the things with the visual adaptation, you have to make choices that in a book you don't have to make, right? And the example he gave, he said, well, like in a book you can say, they ate bread, right? You can just say, you just use the word bread. And the word bread is, of course, a richly evocative word, which is going to invoke many different visual images, right, in many people's own imaginative minds as they're picturing this, right? They ate bread could mean anything from, Hawaiian rolls to matzah, right? I mean, like, who knows what it was, right?
I'm just picturing Gandalf putting a Hawaiian roll in his mouth.
Exactly, right? Yeah. But when you're doing a film, right, you have to have like an actual loaf of bread. Like, you have to make the choice. What kind of bread is it? Is it brown bread? Is it white bread? What is it? Right? Is it leavened bread? Is it unleavened bread? Like, and once you make the choice, like, you've frozen it. Like, you have to make a choice about that. And that's true of so many things. I mean, even much, much bigger things. You think of how, and this is something that a lot of people don't even realize, because of the way that that Tolkien's world, that the Lord of the Rings invokes your imagination in so many powerful ways. A lot of people don't even realize most of the characters receive no physical description. Like, we don't really know what color Frodo's hair is. He doesn't ever say exactly what, so some very basic things we're told, but there's a lot of time. It's funny, the only time that Tolkien was kind of pushed to this is when Pauline Baynes did a bunch of, the illustrator, did a bunch of like little like portraits of the Fellowship in one of her, and he hated it. And he's like, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. But it's his own fault that it's wrong, because he never told us.
He didn't give us any description. Like.
Exactly. And he so often did that. He tells us a lot about what the landscape looks like, right? He tells us a lot about the world. We can picture Middle Earth itself in very concrete ways, but the characters, their faces, their hair, we get very, very little. He never even actually says in any of his stories, not in one of his stories, that elves have pointy ears. Ever.
I found that out a couple of weeks ago, actually, in a TikTok. I don't know why I thought that, but you are absolutely right. He does not.
Yeah. There's one letter where he says something that indirectly suggests that he was assuming that elves had pointy ears. But that's literally the only time he ever addressed it. In none of the stories is it ever said, because it's the kind of thing that they don't say. In some cases, you have, like, we know that the Rohirrim are blonde, because they're like,
they're basically Vikings.
They're Nordic. They're exactly
Nordic.
right. Yeah. So it's kind of part of their thing, right? But most of the time he does not give us any description at all. And again, but that's typical, right? And it's what he's doing. It's the leaving it to your imagination. But again, that's exactly what can't be done when you're doing a visual adaptation, right? So even like from the very beginning, before you even start writing a script or doing anything else, you're already being forced to basically take the story that he wrote and essentially crystallize it into one version that's not going to change anymore. Now, like, you know, after the films right now, like, okay, this is what Frodo looks like. This is what, Aragorn looks like Viggo Mortensen. And, you know, like this is now like a thing. Whereas in the books, we don't get that. So it's just like one preliminary point.
So
right?
going off of that point though, because I have seen this question in chat for a little bit. Chat, I promise I am not ignoring you. I see your questions. I'm trying to work them naturally into the interview. I am getting this a lot because we learn about Sauron and that he takes a beautiful elvish form, and there is a chance that Sauron will be appearing in that beautiful elvish form in the Amazon TV series. So, from the Tolkien Professor himself, canonically, was Sauron hot?
Oh man, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
I think Sauron was very hot. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's got to be now Celebrimbor should be reasonably hot too.
The guy that made the rings with him.
The guy that made the rings with him. Yeah. Celebrimbor is the grandson of Fëanor, who was the hottest elf ever. That's canon. So I mean, you know. Anyway, but Sauron, absolutely. He is. He should if they make. I mean, like. What are you going to depict Anatar, giver of gifts, and make him look like Professor Snape or something? Like, no, that's not what you're going to do. Like, he's absolutely Sauron should be hot. Yes.
Absolutely.
If Sauron is not hot, I'll be disappointed, because he really should be very completely winsome, right? I mean, he should be somebody who now, of course, like he's not out there like, you know, trying to like win the hearts of teenage girls or something. Right. I mean, he's out there trying to win the heart of Celebrimbor.
Maybe Amazon might be.
That, right? Yeah,
we got to think about this from a money perspective, Professor.
It's possible. But anyway, like still, he is as the form that he's taken, right, is an expression of what he's trying to do, and what he's trying to do is be respected as a teacher and a knower of secrets, but also be trusted, and you know, that he's coming among them as a like one of the Valar, right? I mean, the kind of the parallel in a sense. It's not an exact parallel, but if you know the Silmarillion, the parallel is almost to Orome coming among the elves back in Queen Anne, right?
Yes.
And he's just like, come, like I can take you to the new homeland. And now it's Sauron is clearly doing like a minor league version of that, right? He's not trying to take them anywhere. He's not, but he's coming among them as like, you know, I am this semi-divine creature who has come among you and here to give you secrets just because of my compassion for you and my admiration of what you're doing.
I like how you've kind of done the shoulder turn with the smolder there
absolutely.
To kind of
yes, you know, that's why. So yeah, no, like that's totally what how he would be doing. So yeah,
I love it. I love it.
So I would definitely think that hotness would be an intrinsic element of this the way that he's manifesting this form.
Sure. So then follow-up question to that, because we are getting this question in the chat as well. As you are no doubt aware, the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien as a whole is a lot of straight white guys, pretty much exclusively. Do you think in the 21st century, here in maybe this Amazon show, we may see maybe hints at or maybe a direct line to some sort of homosexual relationship between Celebrimbor and Sauron? Because I know there has been discussions on that, especially in online forums, but maybe not anything directly from Amazon. Do you think we'll see any of that?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's not like I'm going to reel back in shock if we do. I'm rather hoping we don't, but this is the reason.
Okay.
This is the trickiest thing. And I know that this topic, like the sex topic, has been one of the things that has given the people who are inclined to be worried about the Amazon production. This has been the thing that has caused
the
most
nudity,
anxiety.
the adult
nudity
scenes,
thing,
all of that,
exactly, all of that, you know. And I very much hope that they don't go very far in any of these directions. And the primary reason for this is that there is one of the things that makes Tolkien stories very remarkable in the context of 21st century entertainment is they are I can't think of any. I really can't think of any works of literature that are as popular as The Lord of the Rings is, and has as little interest in sex and sexuality. I'm not saying, like, there are relationships, but what I'm talking about like prurient interest, you know, like to use an old-fashioned word, like the kind of thing that romance novels do all the time, right? To keep you reading to see if maybe the sex is going to happen later, you know, are we coming closer to the point where he rips her shirt off? Like, you know what I mean? Like that kind of, and of course, needless to say, there are very, very, very many people who use that as a kind of hook, right? As a kind of like, as a way to keep readers engaged, right? And I don't know any author who, like, didn't do that, you know, who kept as clear as Tolkien. There is almost none of that kind of interest or that kind of appeal, basically, in the stories, even in places where there is romance. Like, there's romance, right? But there is none of that. Absolutely none of that. Like, there is no place where we are invited ourselves to be like sexually titillated by the story, by the characters, even on a very, very minor level. I mean, I'm forgetting which one it was. It was there was a female fantasy writer, and I'm trying to remember. Was it Madeline L'Engle? It might have been Madeline L'Engle, who, this was like 30, 40 years ago, said that one of the things that she loved about reading Tolkien was that the like utter lack of that kind of sexual drive, you know, in the stories made them like mentally and emotionally restful in a way that very few other books are. And I think that's true.
So less of like the sexualization, but more of the representation, kind of.
Yes, I mean, it's exactly. It would, to turn this around and to sort of say it in a different way.
Please.
There are lots of things when an adaptation does something. I could probably illustrate with in the Peter Jackson films, which are excellent. I mean, they're wonderful movies, but there are definitely moments when I found most Tolkien readers feel like, okay, it still works, like it still might work in the movie, but this is not right to Tolkien's world. Like, this is not kind of in tune with Tolkien's story, right? A very minor example I would give in The Lord of the Rings, or in the Lord of the Rings films, are the dwarf tossing jokes, right? Like, it's funny, it works, it's fine, sort of, but it's generally fine, but it's not like, that's not really, like, it doesn't totally
it doesn't fit within the context,
right? Similarly, I would say the joke that they pull, and I think it's only in the extended edition, the one where, like, the joke about the stew that Éowyn cooked is like, she's a really bad cook, right? You know, like that also not like, it doesn't fit. It does, like, it's a very un-Tolkien kind of joke. That one is a particularly,
that's like a 21st century scene in a 20th century.
Well, it's weird. Like, it doesn't feel it doesn't feel right. It doesn't, like, it's never a joke that Tolkien would have made. He made lots of jokes, but he wouldn't have made that joke. And it doesn't feel, and to have to overlay the story with the kind of, especially, I mean, to take the obvious parallel, which is the parallel that alarms everybody, the Game of Thrones parallel, right?
Yes, we've seen that a lot.
To you know, the way in which Game of Thrones had sexual prurience, like, you know, when is the next topless scene coming, right? As this continuous overlay over the story, right? I mean, it was an element in almost everything. You know, the hypersexualization, especially of the women's bodies, you know, ways in which, like, women would get topless even in a scene that had nothing to do with sex, right? Just, you know, and that element right? That element to that, you know, and again, the particular kind of interest, right, that overlays the entire story with. There's nothing, absolutely nothing, that could be more at odds with the entire spirit, attitude, perspective of Tolkien's world and Tolkien's works than that.
Okay.
And the more that they overlay this kind of like sexual tension and sexual desire and sexual interest, again, primarily on the part of the viewers, with, you know, having lots of, you know, naked and or scantily clad people on the screen at various times, the more they do that, the more thoroughly they're going. I mean, people are going to just, even people who are Game of Thrones fans and also Tolkien fans are going to look at this and say, this is not Tolkien. There's nothing to do with Tolkien's world. This is absolutely wrong in a really deep way. And it's just because it is, whether people have processed it or not, it is a core element of Tolkien's work. Like, it's just, it's part of the experience, whether you process it or not, whether you even like it or not. It's a core element, and and there's no single way in which they could deviate more thoroughly. So for this reason, I hope they avoid all of it entirely. Like, I don't care. Like, I think it will be much better. The less they do, the better it will be. And you know, that's yeah.
Okay. So Professor, let me put you on the spot really quickly then, and maybe you've signed an NDA and can't talk about it. Have you at any point in your life been involved with the Amazon TV show?
No, I have not.
I was kind of hoping you'd say I can't talk about it. And we'd try to
I
pry it out of you as we went.
I have not, but I've had conversations. Let me just say that. I have had conversations, and there are some things I can't talk about, but I can say that I have not.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
So I can't. I've had no part in the adaptation that they've made.
I got you.
That is
okay. Yeah. I'm picking up what you're putting down. All right. We will very quickly transition out of that part to a question that I know a lot of fans have that involves a meme on this channel, and I do want to see where you sort of go down on this rabbit hole. My channel specifically has this really bizarre phrase. Are you familiar with the phrase yeet means? Y-E-E-T?
I am. Yes, I have 2 teenage sons, so they've taught me.
Okay,
yes,
great.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we have developed is the phrase Yeet Isildur, meaning if Elrond had just thrown Isildur
just
into
pushed him in.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
None of this would have happened. So I'm curious, 2 questions on this one. One, are you team Yeet Isildur or team don't Yeet Isildur? And 2, if Yeet Isildur had happened, what is, do you think, the sort of rabbit hole that you would go down of, or rather butterfly effect of what would have happened if that had happened? Because that's sort of those like what if changing moment histories that's really pivotal, that would change everything.
So on the one hand, theoretically it's a really interesting question, right? Because on the one hand, there is no question. One of the things that is most persistently true in Tolkien's world is that pursuing the right ends by the wrong means never ends well. Like, never. You know, murdering Isildur in that moment, right? You know, which would have been not just killing a dude, but betraying an ally, and you know, like that's. I think it's unequivocally. Right. Had Elrond just like offed Isildur and thrown his body and the ring with it into the cracks of doom, or just pushed Isildur alive into the cracks of doom, there's no question that would have been a very wrong thing to do. Like, very wrong. I mean, it would have been an absolute example of pursuing good ends by very, very unlawful means. So on the one hand, I want to say, there's no question that would have ended badly in some sense, right? Like for Elrond at the very least, right? It would have ended really badly. But then I ask myself, how? exactly
Mhm.
would it have ended badly,
Mhm.
right? What would that story have looked like? The story in which the Third Age began with this act of murder, you know, like Diegel's murder of Smeagol, except, you know, for the destruction of the ring instead of the possession of the ring, right? What would the Third Age have looked like
Mhm.
if that act had been, you know, the like cornerstone, right, of the Third Age? And I don't know. I feel confident though that it would have gone very badly. I mean, Sauron would have been
Fair.
destroyed, right?
Fair.
So like that's, you know, it wouldn't have gone like that. You know, it's not like you know, Sauron would have risen again. No, he wouldn't have risen again.
Mhm.
Like that would have been done. On the one hand, there would have been, you know, there might well have been no Númenórean kingdom at all, right? Neither Gondor nor Arnor might have existed if Isildur is pitched in to the cracks of doom at that point. But again, you could say, well, but hey, like also no rise of Sauron again. So, you know, like net gain, maybe, you know,
6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
right? Exactly. You know,
so do the elves go to war with the human, or rather do the humans start a war with the elves then? Because that is kind of, we collectively on this stream have come to that conclusion that like the humans are probably going to get the sense that if Elrond comes out of there alone, it's like, something's fishy.
right. Yeah. So there was a tragic accident.
Exactly.
I'm afraid. Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, like obviously the first question is like, how many witnesses are there? And, you know, because of course, like if the text literally says it was only them up on the slopes, right? So, you know, Celebrimbor's or not Celebrimbor, sorry. Gilgalad has been killed. Elendil has been
Pretty
killed.
much all of Elrond's friends are dead at this point.
Right. Except for Círdan, right? Who is there?
Who is there? Yes.
By the way, like, seriously, is that the longest field trip Círdan has ever had? In like,
it is literally
10,000
one
years?
end of Middle Earth to the other.
Right. I mean, he's that's quite an outing for the dude who never leaves the Grey Havens. But anyway, okay. So Círdan is the only witness, basically, right? You know, and so the humans, like, so if they just come down, right, the mountain, and the rest of the humans are down at the bottom of the mountain, right? And they're like, I'm sorry, both, you know, Sauron is destroyed and the ring is destroyed, but Gilgalad and Elendil and Isildur were all killed. Who questions that, right? You know, I mean, so if there are no witnesses at all, conceivably he could carry it off and prevent, you know, the war, because I mean, after all, they it's like Gilgalad, the High King, is dead too, right? So it's not like, it doesn't look like super suspicious, right? In that sense, like, you know, there've been casualties on, you know, both parts. But so I don't know if war necessarily comes of it. Again, depending on how that's, or, you know, but maybe there were witnesses, or maybe if there,
or someone saw
also,
them go up and then,
right. It's really hard to, it's really hard to tell. During the final battle, we're told explicitly that they were there. Isildur says that only they were there. Of course, we don't have that record either if Isildur gets yeeted, right? But what's the past tense or past participle? Is it yeeted, or is it yote? Like
you know what?
He was yote into the, like,
I don't know. I
there needs
think
to be a
people
past participial form, right?
I think it is yeeted, but
yeeted?
You're the professor, and I am a guy on the internet.
Well,
so
right now, I'm not a philologist, so I would probably choose the wrong form. All I can say is that I very much prefer, you know, Old English strong verbs to like weak verbs where you just add the ed. So like I would like you know, like yote is how
Isildur?
I would do the past tense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like he yote Isildur. So yeet in the present tense, yote. Maybe it can be a different past participle. You know,
it's a fake word.
fun.
We can do whatever
know,
we like
right?
with it. Chat, take notes.
Great.
We're gonna have a test
so
on this
somebody
later.
come up with a really good strong verb, you know, conjugation of yeet.
I like it.
Because it sounds like, it actually kind of, as a word, it kind of sounds like an Old English word.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I can totally imagine yeet being, I mean, it practically is. I mean, there are words that are quite like it, not words that mean the same thing, but I mean, it sounds like an Old English word. So I would kind of like to see it conjugated like an Old English word. That's all.
May I just say, never in my life did I think I would be sitting here having a conversation about the word yeet with you. ever. Like, this is like very surreal. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, so chat, if you have any questions for the Tolkien Professor, please put them in right now. I will be taking the best ones and then asking in the minute or two that folks take to form their questions. Professor Olson, is there anything you want to let people know about that they should check out of yours, places you want to direct them?
Sure. Yeah. So Signum University is the online university that I founded. Really, it kind of grew out of my podcast, honestly. Sometimes people will look at our degree program and they're like, why so much emphasis on Tolkien studies? And I'm like, well, there's a story there, right? It kind of grew out of my Tolkien podcast. So that's kind of, that's my podcast audience was the original audience for the university.
I'm throwing that in chat, by the way, everyone, if you would like to go check out the website.
Yeah, signumuniversity.org. There's a lot of things that we're doing. We have, again, largely because it grew out of the spirit of my podcast, which, as I already mentioned, was about trying to make educational opportunities and intellectual engagement more widely available. We have not only our master's degree program, our official degree bearing program, but we have lots of opportunities for people to engage on other levels, right? So people who you can come and you can audit one of our courses, fully participate in our courses without, getting credit and writing papers and stuff. A lot of people really like doing that.
My college days are done, so probably the best bet for me.
Yeah, you can do what we call an anytime audit, which is just asynchronously. You can get the whole lecture series from one of our get like Tom Shippey's lecture series or like Verlin Flieger's lecture series and or some of the classes that I've taught and download those and work your way through those. We also have, of course, there's my weekly broadcasts that I'm still doing, which is kind of the what my own podcast has sort of evolved into is my weekly teaching sessions. I'm doing I do a series called the Mythgard Academy, which is basically like an online book club where people vote on the books that we do, and we've been going through the history of Middle Earth for many years. We also do other works of fantasy and science fiction. In fact, this week, this coming Wednesday, the 26th, we are beginning a new discussion of The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. Some golden age science fiction we're doing. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then after that, we're going to discuss together The Nature of Middle Earth, the new book that's being published in September.
That is September 2nd, I think.
That's it. Yeah, that's
Very
the day.
Exciting.
So right after that, we go on Wednesday nights. So and that's a Thursday, the 2nd. So the next week, like the 8th, is when I plan to start discussing The Nature of Middle Earth. So I'll be reading it for the first time. Folks can read it along, and we can discuss it kind of chapter by chapter as we go through.
You've just started a giant book club that turned into a university, basically.
Kind of, yeah. It's sort of what happened. Yeah. So that's the Mythgard Academy. I also do. You mentioned the Silmarillion Film Project. Silmarillion Film Project is super fun. This is us, me and a team of, fans and listeners who have been engaged to varying extents over the years. We have a core team of folks who have been with us from the beginning. And what we're doing is we are planning our way through we thought of the Amazon idea about 6 years before they did, which is doing a serial, TV series adaptation of the Silmarillion. And so we're planning it. We started with the Ainulindale, and we're going to go all the way through, probably all the way through the Lord of the Rings, actually, and do the entire story.
Quite the undertaking.
It is. We've been doing this for, I think, 6 or 7 years now.
Wow.
We're in season 5. We're coming towards the end of season 5, which is going to end. Season 5 is going to end with the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame.
Yes.
So we're integrating lots and lots of stuff. So like in the very next episode that we're going to have, which is in 2 weeks, we're going to be discussing the episode in which we have the star-crossed romance of Andreth and Aignor, which is, of course, only discussed in Morgoth's Ring.
Yes.
In the Athrobeth
So you're taking aspects of the 12-volume histories of Middle Earth and my goodness, you've been together. Busy, haven't you?
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. So right. So the plan, and then of course, the biggest one that I do every week is my Exploring the Lord of the Rings class. And that's on Tuesday nights. And Exploring the Lord of the Rings is I think it's already pretty much the longest
running discussion of one book since, like, I don't know, they're probably like some Talmudic scholars who did it longer than we, but we're going to be rivaling them before too long here. We are about 190 sessions in. The sessions are about an hour and a half to 2 hours long. We're 190 sessions in, working our way through the text of The Lord of the Rings, and we're not quite done with the Council of Elrond. So this is, I think it's going to be, we're about 4.5 years into this discussion.
Wow.
And we have been discussing the Council of Elrond since, I think it was December.
That seems about right.
2019. Yeah.
I understand it's mostly exposition, but goodness gracious.
Of 2019, yeah.
Wow.
We're literally discussing the Lord of the Rings paragraph by paragraph,
wow.
like the entire text. We're not skipping a sentence or a punctuation mark, and it's been the most amazing thing I've ever done. It's
goodness
incredible. Taking the basically, I've been slowing down more and more. As I started, like we did the first chapter in like 3 sessions or something ludicrous.
Wow.
Right? And then as soon as I got into Gandalf and Frodo's discussion,
yep.
I think that the first day in which we were like, okay, from here on out, we're going to discuss every paragraph along the way was
because it is such an important chapter.
It is. And then like we just kept going, and
sure.
and it's been slowing down more and more. But yeah, it's basically like, I'm like, okay, I'm getting older. I don't have time to go fast, because like this might be the last time I ever teach my way through the Lord of the Rings,
wow.
right? So I'm leaving nothing on the table, right? Let's think through let's think through every question that we have. Let's kind of talk about. Oh man, it has been a continuous revelation. So it's a commitment. It's a lot of time, and there are people who find it and they try to catch up with us in real time. There's a lot of work.
It is. That's a lot of content. My goodness.
It's like 350 hours worth of listening to catch up to real time. And we're only in chapter 2 of book 2. The projection, we have a scientist among us who has, done some statistical analysis and projected that we're on pace to finish The Lord of the Rings sometime in probably 2036 or 2037, basically. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was trying to come up with something quippy, but wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It is cool. It is an amazing immersion, and it's been great.
All right, so we've got some questions from viewers. I'll say, yeah, okay, we'll do this. Sorry, I'm just organizing it in my head. So, question 1: what about Tolkien's life interests you the most?
What about Tolkien's life interests me the most? That's really,
because he lived quite the life, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Though in some ways, when the Tolkien, movie came out last year, or no, I think it was last year.
2 years ago. 2020 doesn't count as
the
a
recent
year.
one. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't count as a year. Anyway, recently when that came out. That's right. I saw it in the theater, so it couldn't have been last year. But anyway, when that movie came out, one of the things that I was concerned about with it is that, like, from a movie making standpoint, his life was pretty boring. It was like, taught my classes again, went home and cleaned the chicken coops. Like that was like your average day in the life of Tolkien. And then worked on the Lord of the Rings
minus the
after
World
my
War
wife
I
was in
stuff.
bed. Right? Yeah, exactly. Right. So I knew the World War I stuff was going to be huge because that's one of the most, the only kind of like film-worthy, sensational moments of his life. But anyway, so on the one hand, his daily life was sort of dull in those ways. But so as far as like what interests me most, just sort of the way in which the interaction between his creative life on the one hand and his, like, the way that his creative life and his like normal domestic life kind of interacted, because I get the impression that in a lot of ways those were pretty compartmentalized for Tolkien, right? And I think it's one of the things that made his relationship with Christopher so special, is that Christopher was like a bridge between, you know, his normal daily family life and his creative.
Because Christopher,
life.
his son, for those that don't know, would do the readings or the proofreadings of his works, and he would get paid money to do so.
Exactly. Yeah, that was when he was very little. Yeah, he would get paid for every mistake he found, right? But yeah, I mean, as he got older, you can see. I mean, you can see in Tolkien's letters how much more he's relying on Christopher's, you know, not even collaboration. I don't want to make it too strong, but I mean, it was a very important part, of his kind of community. And even the Inklings, right? And the Inklings, of course, really important for Tolkien, the group of friends that he met down at the pub with, which was, or more often met in C.S. Lewis's rooms
to be college. A fly on the wall in that room.
Oh, man. Yeah, definitely. That was, of course, but even that, in a sense, I get the sense that was, although it was people, like mostly, many people from work, right? You know, from Oxford. And so part of that daily life in that sense. I get the vague impression anyway that even the Inklings meetings were kind of like part of that other life. Like there you could read his story and get feedback on it and hear about other people's stories. But then like that compartment is done and you go home and you clean the chicken coop and you you teach your classes and you're working on your stuff. So just like how that worked for Tolkien, you know, how, like, to what extent was it really as compartmentalized as I think it might have been, as I get the impression that it was, or was it not? What was his wife's relationship with that, for instance? You know, I wonder. You know, I just don't know. You know, not that it's any of my business, his relationship with his wife, but it's just like, you know,
it's a curiosity.
When I think about his life, that's definitely one of the things that I feel like I don't really understand, you know, because, you know, you can read the biographies and you can understand sort of the one half of his life, right? And you can read his own works and his own drafts and everything else that we have, and get a good sense of how his own creative life is kind of progressing, right? And developing and everything. But how those two things kind of fit together,
almost
to what extent they did.
Almost like two different people. Almost.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I wonder. Was it or was it not? I'm not sure. So yeah, that's the thing that I'm most curious about.
All right. So next question: have you had a Lord of the Rings marathon, meaning you sit down and you watch movies 1, 2, and 3 all in a row?
Oh yeah. In fact, I used to host this annually. Back when I was a tenured professor at the school I used to teach at. One of my students was this, and I was there when the movies came out. Well, right after the movies came. They were just like new to DVD, basically, when I was there. Yeah. So the DVDs had just come out, and I had some pretty enthusiastic students who were huge fans.
Understandable.
And so I had this one student who like parked herself in my office, and she's like, I want to do a movie marathon and I need a faculty sponsor. Obviously, you're the one. So can we do this? And I'm like, okay. And we did, and a bunch of people came, and it was really fun. We actually there was this old, like, this old auditorium with like not super comfortable, like velvet seats and stuff. But it was a really like interesting environment to, and they had a big huge screen, like a real movie screen, not just like a projector screen in the front of the classroom or something.
Wow.
So we did it there, and that actually started an annual tradition. We did 6 or 7 years in a row of those, and by the end, I started getting really, really elaborate with food, because after we did it once, what was really clear is like, okay, there needs to be a lot of food involved in
absolutely
this, right? So starting the second time we did it, I started planning out. We'd have 5-6 meals over the course of the so it was like a full Hobbit day experience, right? Where we were eating 6 meals, and we were, so every time, I had breakfast for when people showed up, right? And then we watched the first one, and I was like in the back, like getting the food together and everything. And then like when the intermission every intermission between, you know, because like there's the halfway intermission in each film, right, plus the gaps in between films. You know, when the lights came on, there'd be a new meal in the back for everybody. So it was a huge, and I got really elaborate. I mean, like eventually there was one year I was like, we actually cooked rabbit stew.
Oh my
for
gosh!
instance, for one of the meals. Yeah. One of my favorite memories of that, of my time at that college, because it was, as I said, it was this old auditorium and there were no like rooms attached to it.
Right.
So the only place I could use to kind of stage the food was the faculty lounge, which was right around the corner. And there was this one moment when I was there with 3 other student helpers, literally butchering rabbits. Like we were like chopping up raw rabbit meat for this stew.
Oh my
right
God.
And I mean, they weren't like, we weren't like, we didn't have to like take the skin off.
Okay.
But like we were like, I mean,
there's raw meat everywhere.
Raw meat everywhere, like
Yeah.
raw meat and blood and stuff, you know, and we're like chopping up and putting it into a pot. And one of my senior faculty colleagues comes in, like steps into the room, and there's like all these students with like knives and meat and blood, and I'm like, hi. This would take a while to explain.
I love it. I love
anyway,
it.
but we had coney stew, and it was.
Oh,
so
that's
that
cool.
Was, you know,
that is very cool.
Yeah, that was fun. Anyway, so yeah, that was that. So I definitely had a strong tradition of that. And my youngest son is reading The Lord of the Rings right now, and when he finishes reading The Lord of the Rings, we're gonna have a family film marathon.
Is he reading it for the first time?
He's reading it for the first time.
Oh, that must be quite the
Yes.
experience for you.
It is. You know, it's funny. Like, in some, like, I've always been very kind of cautious about this, right? Like, I haven't been, you know, people have sometimes, you know, sort of said, because I have 2 boys, and sometimes people have said like, oh, like you must be like, you know, all over Tolkien with your kids and stuff. And I'm actually kind of hands off, because both of my kids grew up. I mean, I started the Tolkien Professor podcast when my oldest son was like 6. So both of my kids have grown up knowing that Tolkien, it's like the family business, you know what I mean? Like it's what I do, and they know it's what I do, and so they kind of associate. It's like, this is like Dad's thing, and so I was always very cautious lest I, you know, make them feel like they're being pushed into it. Like I wanted to, if they came to like it, I wanted that to be organic, you know, because again, there was this kind of pressure around Tolkien with my kids, right? For their, like, from their perspective, that I always tried to be really cautious about. So I didn't push either of them to read it before they were, you know, before they asked to, before they wanted to. And so, yeah, so the youngest is reading them right now. He's
and the movie marathon afterwards.
Because that's the one rule that I've had, is like, I'm not going to let you watch the movies until you've read the books.
Oh,
like
interesting.
That's a rule. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
they haven't even seen them yet.
Yeah, my oldest one has, because he's read them, but yeah, the younger one has not seen the film.
Wow. Very cool.
Because that I've forbidden until he reads them. Like, it's fine, you can watch them anytime you want, you just have to read the books first.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay.
It's the one thing that I kind of want to preserve, because it is hard. I mean, enormous respect for all of the people who came to the books from the films, you know, and that's something that has been, you know, no matter what else anyone thinks about the films, you know, the greatest purist in the world would have to confess that the films have been a wonderful thing. I mean, there have just been thousands and thousands of people who have come to the books who might never have. So that's a really wonderful thing. But if I could choose, I would always choose to have people read the books first before those images are really, you know, kind of, you know, because when you're going to the books and like you're just, and you've already got, you know, Viggo Mortensen and Ian McKellen in your head, right? You know, in your mind's eye. Back to what I was saying before about those choices, right? That crystallize things visually. That introduces several barriers to the reading experience, the imaginative experience, that just aren't there if you don't have it, right? You know, but you can't, you know, kind of regain your virginity as far as that's concerned. Once you've seen it, like it's there.
Yeah. I wish I could go back and read them, or read and watch them for the first time. My goodness.
Yeah, exactly. So that's been the one kind of rule that I've had.
Okay, very nice.
Anyway, so but we will do a film marathon, an extended edition film marathon.
That's going to be great. That's going to be great. And just sort of to that point, if I'm recalling correctly, one of the animated versions of the Lord of the Rings had Boromir wearing a Viking helmet with like a full
Viking
beard?
helmet, yes, and no pants. Yeah, and Aragorn doesn't
Pantsless
wear pants
Boromir.
either.
Yeah,
pants totally
Boromir
optional.
And Aragorn.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was really weird. So like that's the Bakshi animated version.
Yes.
In which like the Balrog, it looks like he's wearing fuzzy boots and has butterfly wings. So it's weird, very strange. Many of the choices are very strange.
Yeah.
And I can say on the one hand, the impulse seems to be a very kind of familiar impulse, which people still feel. That is the impulse to kind of make it a little more multicultural, right? So Aragorn seems clearly to be Native American. Like
he's got the darker skin.
Right. He looks and is dressed like, you know, a Native American brave.
Yeah.
You know, that's what Aragorn looks like. Why Boromir equals Viking, I have no idea.
It's a choice.
No idea.
It is a
Other
choice.
than I mean, Boromir has a horn, right? I don't know how that translates to horned helmet, but apparently that's what they were thinking.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So there are a bunch of strange choices that Bakshi made there, but yeah.
All right. We will end with this final question, because obviously today's stream has been entirely about the Lord of the Rings. But as someone who has basically made their living off of Tolkien, do you have any other recommendations for other authors that people may enjoy having read the Lord of the Rings?
Other authors people may enjoy having read the Lord of the Rings. You know, I have a hard time with this, because like sometimes people will say who are like, you know, I remember like having conversations about like Tolkien and Lewis and what they meant for fantasy and their generation, and you know the kind of impact that they've had and everything. People will say like, you know, who are the like Lewis and Tolkien's of today? And I'm like, you know, there aren't nothing like that. You know, I mean, like it's just not the same. Like what the whole writing world is so different. Like the whole publishing world is so different. I mean, for goodness sake, The Lord of the Rings would never in a billion years be published today.
No.
Can you imagine a modern publisher receiving that manuscript exactly as published? Right. I mean, like the manuscript we all know and love. Holy cow. Like what would a modern publisher do to that? Like it's just inconceivable. That anything like that would get published these days. So again, it's a totally different world, right? And so it's hard to say. I mean, I can talk about other fantasy authors that I enjoy.
Yeah, please go right ahead.
I really enjoy Brandon Sanderson. He's one of my favorite modern writers.
Are you a Stormlight Archive or Mistborn?
Okay, so I haven't gotten to the Stormlight Archive yet. That's now. I came to it very recently. I only started reading Sanderson maybe 3 years ago. Okay. And I started with Mistborn, which I really quite liked. And I've read a bunch of some of his others.
Yeah, the whole Cosmere, you know, thing. He's got a whole.
It's amazing.
If Tolkien has a world, Brandon Sanderson has a universe.
Absolutely, and it's so cool. And I just love that about. I mean, the kind of world building that Brandon Sanderson does. You know, I love the kind of systematization of things. You know, of course, Brandon Sanderson is famous for, you know, all the totally different magic systems, that he invents in his different books. And that's, you know, I love that. You know, that's something that I really enjoy. In a totally different note, but something that I'm also very interested that I also like a lot. I really like Jim Butcher's Dresden Files.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of the Dresden Files. That's of course it's modern urban fantasy, right. You know, rather than, you know, your sort of traditional epic fantasy. But I quite enjoy it. I think that Butcher's series has become really interesting. One of the things that I find really fascinating about it is the way in which he kind of to me very interesting ways is sort of systematically bringing together so many different mythologies and concepts and things. It's really fun to sort of watch all of those things come together. So that's another series that I have really liked. I know, of course, another thing that's in the news right now is The Wheel of Time.
Yes,
The big Robert Jordan series that and of course this is another thing. I think, actually, I'm trying to remember the chronology here, but I think that's actually what brought me to Sanderson, in fact.
Because he helped write the last three.
Yeah, because Jordan died.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I felt a little bit bad about it, but I used to joke that was the only way that series was ever going to come to an end, was when Robert Jordan died. It was the most out of control series, like story I've ever read. Yeah. And I loved them. I love the Wheel of Time series. I read them as they were coming out. But I gave up. I gave up in like book 10 or something.
That is right around when people quit. Yep.
Yeah. It was, I gave up around then because I was like, look, there's, it's not that length itself dissuades me, right? I'm in for the long haul. There's the famous C.S. Lewis quote where he says, no one has ever he says, you can't have a book long enough or a cup of tea big enough for me, right? Like, and I'm with that, right? I'm totally with that. So it wasn't the length that always disturbed me, it was the trajectory, right? Like 10 really long books. It had been like 5,000-6,000 pages of reading, and there was no sense that we were coming towards, like, every single book was still widening the plot, and I'm like, we are never ever getting anywhere. So I gave up. I just kind of in despair, like, this is the story that will never end. And but worse, it was very, very unsatisfying because not any single one element of the earlier plot was ever resolved. Like, it all just kept getting pushed off, and instead of moving forward and satisfying those things, it was like just new things being added, right? Every single book. And I'm like, come on, man. But it was really funny because I left it behind, and that was maybe 2002, 2003.
Oh yeah, it's about early 2000s, I think, is.
Yeah, that's when I stopped. And then and I heard that he died, and I'm like, that's very sad, but like, I knew he was going to die before that series finished. Like, there was nothing more inevitable than that. Then I heard about Brandon Sanderson finishing it, right? And from that time, I'm like, oh, I should go back and see how that finished off. But I didn't get around to it until a few years back. And then I listened to the audiobooks, which is like, a cool 700 hours of listening or something.
I listened to all 14 through the audiobooks.
Yeah,
took months.
It did. Yeah, it was fantastic. I love it. But anyway, it was incredible because I found just one piece of information completely changed my experience of reading even the first 10 books that I'd already read before. I started at the beginning and reread the whole thing and went through to the end.
Of course.
And the one piece of information was knowing how many total books there were in the series, that it came to an end, and how many books there were. Because part of it was the despair of being like, okay, am I in book 10 of what's eventually going to be a 35-part series or what? But like, when I knew it's 14 books, it's 14 books. So now I know where in the trajectory I am. Like, I can say, like, okay, I could keep telling myself we're 2/3 of the way done now. Like, it's, and that anchor to be able to just to know that was coming together. And Sanderson did an amazing job. I've never seen an author who did a better job of entering into someone else's world and staying true to that world, and even not entirely. You can tell some of the differences, but
you see it.
But he did a wonderful, like, with his characters and everything. He did a wonderful job with those. I thought it was such a not only a skillful but a deeply respectful job that Sanderson did with that. I was really, really impressed with. That's, I think, when I started reading Sanderson. I was the same. I've been meaning to get around to him, but So, and of course, that's another series that's coming. They're doing the adaptation of the Wheel of Time, and I'll be very interested to see to see how that goes. There's so many things in the Wheel of Time. It's just a really fascinating fascinating thing. I mean, people will say, George R.R. Martin is like, the greatest epic world builder since Tolkien, and I'm like, no, Robert Jordan.
Yeah,
Robert Jordan was there first.
Got him beat. Got him beat. All right, well, Professor, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'll let you have the final word. Anything you want to say, promote, do, floor is yours.
No, just people can the shows that I was mentioning, the weekly shows that we're doing and stuff. The place to go, if you want one place to go to kind of find all the stuff and kind of root around and see if there's something you want to listen to or get into more, would be the Signum University YouTube channel. All of the videos I've made, there I don't know, hundreds of videos now that I've posted there, and you can go like all of the different Mythgard Academy book discussions that we've done. So if you want to go back and you want to go through some of the history, I've taught my way chapter by chapter through the entire history of Middle Earth, from the Book of Lost Tales 1 all the way through Morgoth's Ring, is as far up as we've gotten. So the first 10 volumes of the history of Middle Earth, or Unfinished Tales, or all kinds of stuff there. And of course, non-Tolkien stuff. Like if you want to read through something like Dracula or Ender's Game or Dune, we have classes on all, we've done sessions on all those things as well. So you can find those in playlists in different places on the YouTube channel. And of course, the massive playlist that is Exploring the Lord of the Rings. And you can join us on Tuesday nights. But anyway, so if you subscribe to the Signum University YouTube channel, and if you can poke around there and discover lots and lots of content. So,
Professor, I appreciate your time. I know everyone in chat appreciates you taking the time to be here. I would love to have you back on again. I feel like we have just scratched the surface of your extensive knowledge. But yeah, I would definitely love to have you back. And thank you so much for being here. Folks in the chat, thank you so much for being here as well. We are going to wrap up. We will be back on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. I have been DonMarshall72. Above me is the Tolkien Professor, Corey Olsen. And thank you all so much. Professor, give us 1 second. I'll wrap up the technical stuff on my end, and then we'll chat at the end. Thanks, everybody.
Very good.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.